guys a synopsis, a high-level synopsis of what we will be talking about. And I'd like to know who's in the room as well. So we can start off.
Yeah, my name is Tim, I think. I'm an architect. I live in Minneapolis, but I'm originally from Maine, and I was born in California.
Oh, wow.
So I have
traveled the whole country.
That's right. And my dad's roots are in the southeast, North Carolina.
Okay.
So I feel like I have some connections to most of the country.
All right.
But yeah, and I've been trying to do transition-related things since about 2009 or 10, somewhere. So it's been a while.
So what has been your most challenging proposition with integrating transition into architectural framework?
Well, let's see. When I started out doing this stuff, I was working on sustainable buildings.
Okay.
The connections are pretty broad. In about 2010, I transitioned to a different firm, and pretty much their concerns are so kind of counter to transitional thinking that, I would say the two are almost exclusive of each other. So the difficulty is that architects are kind of an appendage to the financial system. Mm-hmm. We think of ourselves as makers, but we're actually, like I say, we're a service industry that's more connected to banking than we are willing to admit.
Yep.
And so that's probably the biggest. The projects that get the best chance at it are funded differently, often through state and government. But even private foundation are probably the highest level performing buildings. So
okay.
My biggest task is probably on the finance side.
Gotcha. And Kathy?
Kathy Judeman.
How are you?
I'm fine. And
can you tell us in 1 minute or less who you are, why you're here?
So I'm from Helena, Montana, and I'm recently retired.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And working on some sustainable volunteer efforts in my community and trying to figure out how to step into some community leadership roles in Helena.
Sounds good.
And I will say just one more sentence, which is I moved from Houston, and what I'm finding in Montana is that it's much more straightforward to be part of the government conversations than it was in the larger communities, and so I'm hoping that it'll be possible to be an influencer.
Okay. We're just giving a 1 minute or less overview of who we are and why we're here, kind of.
Oh, come back.
Okay. All right.
I'm Martin. I live in Minneapolis. Let's see, currently I'm working for a community center. I'm their urban agriculture program manager, so we do work that connects residents with spaces to grow their own food. We also grow food for our food shelf and provide community education. We're working on a more economic development end. There's a pretty large piece of urban farmland that came available, and we see it that already has a greenhouse on it, and so we see that as an opportunity to incubate some small businesses in the neighborhood. We also work with the city, state, and local park government. We actually have a separate park government from city government in the city of Minneapolis. And so right now we're working on kind of platforms and garden policies, and at the state level we got an urban agriculture pilot bill passed last year. So those are the main work that I'm doing right now. I'm interested in the longer term in the broader regional agricultural transition. If you were to leave the city, you would see on any direction around you that we're in the middle of a corn-fed monoculture, and so the technologies, the agricultural technologies to transition that, and also the food system technologies we need to make that land productive and resilient again.
Okay.
There's a long-term interest in that.
Thank you. Angie?
I'm Angie, and you need to meet my husband because on August 7th, our family farm will be organic.
Oh.
And we made the decision to move away from having our conventional operator grow stuff that's not for people to eat. And it's not easy, but we should talk.
Yeah.
Well, and get my husband involved. I'm a band director and classical saxophonist, but in my my off time, I like to we do climate change activism, and I'm enthusiastic about plant-based diet, so I'm trying to encourage people to do that along with the family farm.
Thank you.
And I was especially drawn to this because you're going to talk about cross-cultural and social communication tools. That was the thing that got my attention.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Nina Smolyar. I am living in Massachusetts. I'm the network coordinator for the New England Resilience and Transition Network, which is building alliances and a network out of grassroots groups working on social justice and sustainability and transition type of initiatives all across New England. So there are lots of different aspects of leadership and followership, and all kinds of things come up and difficulties. So your title was really appealing. I'm
Okay.
very curious to
right.
hear what you have to share.
Well, thank you.
My name is John Fuller. I'm here from the Twin Cities, an outer ring suburb called Shoreview. And I'm really interested in the impact of economic thinking and activity on all aspects of the culture that it's affecting. And I'm here to determine when to lead and how, and when to follow and how.
That's a great question. That is a great question. Two more people, I think, and three more.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Fani Baruki, and I came here from Berkeley, California.
Oh,
Yeah.
I do some work in Berkeley.
Oh, good. We'll have to talk. Yeah, South Berkeley, actually. Yeah. What else were we supposed to say?
Just 1 minute about who you are, why you're here, what do you hope
Why
to
you're
get from the
here.
workshop?
Okay. Well, the leadership aspect, and it's changing a lot in my community, and one of the very strong leaders just passed away. Actually, a couple of them in June. So it's interesting. It's like an emerging place.
I'm Jessica Cahotis. I hail from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We launched Transition Milwaukee in very early '09, and we've had a few notable successes. You know, we really started discussions and conversations around food, so we launched the Victory Garden Initiative. We've been involved in the Time Bank Exchange, and really my focus is dynamic governance within the organization in Milwaukee. How can you keep the momentum moving? I've been working the last few years on a living skills lab to bring students in, co-house, and then actually fund the organization.
How many people in the co-lab? You know how big that's going to be?
That is going to be, I'd like to start out with 10 students, but then
okay.
also hook them up with local businesses
Okay.
so that they can start apprenticeships at the end of the program.
And what year students are these?
What's that?
They're high school or college students?
College. And so we would come out with people. So basically what I'd like to do is almost duplicate what's being done in Montrose, Colorado.
Okay.
We have, and this is kind of an intergenerational experiment as well in Milwaukee, probably a lot of seniors who live alone who have this space in order to house. I'd like to have the students exchange their work in exchange for the materials that they are producing, vegetables, whether they're learning how to grow those. I am currently a retail manager at a startup butcher shop that focuses on local pastured meats. I'd like them to come in and learn how to butcher, how to renovate buildings, etc. I mean, the list goes on and on, but that would essentially be it. And at the end of the program, have them understand exactly what they need to do in order to start up their own small business in the local. So that's why I'm here, and you're
Good.
on my eye.
Okay, so did I miss anybody? Yes.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry,
Bill
Bill.
Elwood from Minneapolis. I've been involved in my faith community, a group of churches, and my neighborhood on renewable energy projects, more specifically solar. And I'm looking at bringing bringing transitional concepts and ideas into my community and expanding my community in the process. So that's why I'm here.
Liz, I hate to put you on the spot 1 minute about who you are and what you're doing here.
Hi everybody, I'm Liz. I'm from Decorah, Iowa. I'm doing in the leadership classroom. I'm a leader, I'm a mentor. I'm looking for ways to pass it along, ways to listen better, ways to share.
Great. Okay, so I'm still waiting for my equipment to wrap, but I'll get started. What I'm going to talk to you about is functioning as a leader in a very transactional system when you're transformational. And functioning, I look at that process through 3 tiers: micro, meso, and macro. So I'll look at formal, informal, and meeting service delivery systems, right? So micro is one-on-one engagements, contact that you typically have in small group dynamics. In community settings, they're the transactions that move towards transformation when people build a relationship with you, begin to trust you. In people of color communities, we have an onslaught of university types, dominant culture pedagogy to come in, all well-meaning, but typically come in from a standpoint of, I want to help you fix something. Most organizations and institutions don't do an asset map to discern what are the natural assets in that community and how can they partner and align their support to ultimately empower vulnerable people to be more participatory in the 21st century global economy. So what does that look like? And I'll share that with you in a moment. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. I meant to ask this earlier. I can't write because of an injury.
Okay.
Would it be okay to record?
Certainly.
Thank you so much.
Does anyone have a problem with
Yeah.
being taped or having pictures? All right. So what I will share with you that I've done over the last 10 years since I've been involved with transition, I'm a certified transition trainer, and probably 4 years ago when I got recertified in Thrive in Chicago, Transition US and actually Naresh was here, and Sophie asked me to design a cultural competency component. And let me go backwards and say, since my onset in the transition towns as a trainer, I got adopted early. They kind of looked at my skill set, adopted me, and then I got trained afterwards, if that makes sense to people. Because I was doing stuff in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, that was transition-like. People thought I should connect with transition towns, so I did. I met Tina Clark. We sat on and talked, and she said, you should be a trainer. She took me to Cummington, Massachusetts. I met with Naresh and Sophie on the farm for about 3 days. They kind of tested me out, gave me the green light, and kind of allowed me to come into this situation. Since that time, I have noticed that since I've been presenting from all around the country, that I'm usually the only person of color in the room. So when you do the analysis, if you look at a tipping point on the global level and even in the U.S., the number of people that control, 93% of the wealth is about 20% of the population, right? So if they net zero out, we will not create a tipping point to augment our parts per million, which is closing up to 500, right? So when you start looking at who are the contributors, like who are contributing unconsciously to where we are with greenhouse gases and such, it's largely uneducated communities around what is a carbon footprint, how are they contributing. So I found it difficult for me to do this work and do it in places where I didn't see people like me who I knew were contributing unconsciously to this state of being. And then secondarily, when I was doing this work all around the country, the people who were taking up this opportunity were people who had means to do so. They had means to put solar panels on their house, get a Prius, like really live that life. So when you start looking at, okay, who is being pushed into transition, those people who would naturally move into transition are already kind of moving into transition. It's the people on the fence and beyond that I think constitute our work with regards to getting them to look at this as an opportunity to create a paradigm shift. So I'm going to talk to you about how that's taking place for me on 3 levels, on the micro, meso, macro. So micro is this one-on-one engagement strategy, and I'll share with you how I've done that cross-culturally. Meso is when we look at self-help groups, nonprofits, and small businesses. What is their role in this ecosystem? Macro is universities and institutions that play a macro level responsibility for society. And then peripheral, which is a fourth level, is this engagement of political sectors, both in a national, regional, and global level, right? So if I can take a minute and see if I can, where's my technical assistance at?
I can help to an extent, but I'm gonna go grab.
No, it's just for the job. I like it in the back. It's nice. 5 hours straight through. Yeah, so you know what so they're gone up, so less, yeah, exactly. So it's so funny how we talk about distance in terms of time now instead of miles. Yeah. How was the one
She was up in the just in front of my other daughter.
Yeah.
I still hear myself.
Yeah, exactly. You were, developed there. What would you say the main difference in time between?
They have a handwriting actually because Sylvie was in her fire for a couple months when she was living out there.
It's so different.
And
I
collected
was a little.
photocopies.
Sure. Yeah.
But northern food, so it seems like just landscape. Diluted very slowly.
It's very similar. Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think that, because I've always kind of wanted to be involved in, which is really fun. I mean, I grew up in Michigan, so opposition. So again, it was small, almost market size. And I wanted to be part of that. My husband is an art student.
So how big is the
I don't
house?
mind.
Yeah.
One day I'd like to return it, but
Yeah. So it's in small,
a
right?
picture of it one day. His kids are grown and done. Jess, you're gonna have a hobby farm. It's gonna be like a half hour from the city, and he'll be able to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You'll see each other.
I myself was trying to hold up.
He does, mainly
So,
healthcare, so he's really carved his.
So did you change the operators for the farm too, or did the previous operator kind of come along for this?
We had a really good conditional operator who was just recently said.
Is now expanding throughout the Midwest.
Everything I did, yeah, I did the intensive.
It was for a firm.
For all the.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, what is your?
And you're running it yourself?
This technology, this so I would try to talk through some of the high-level points and then swiftly move through some of the other I did. The things I think were critical. So the notion for this work really came out of the work I started doing with Transition almost 10 years ago, as I mentioned before. And where I saw the bridge that was missing was how do you take vulnerable people and attach them to very smart, able people, and how do you create a shift of knowledge base and power without making people feel demeaned in the process, right? Because quite frankly, the work I do in Berkeley, for example, I'm part of the cancer-free economy, so I'm trying to,
Oh, for the Measure D soda?
and part of the Garfield Foundation in this national and global movement. And so the work I'm doing there is I'm trying to draw a correlation and causal relationship between PM10 and PM2.5, air particulate matter, and asthma and cancer. In the community I'm going to talk about, we have 20% asthma rate, twice the national average. So we're trying to discern, what my team is doing is analyzing the impact that has on the educational career trajectory of a kid, if they're missing twice as many school days. Then they have the current population I work with is, I serve 1,100 kids a year, and we provide academic support to get them to college. However, we lose 43% of those kids every year because of mobility issues, right? Then we currently serve 20% of Pittsburgh Public Schools' entire homeless population in 3 schools. And on top of that, we have twice the national asthma rate. So I was trying to figure out if there's a causal relationship between asthma and cancer along the PM10 and PM2.5 air particulate matter. And then say, given that I've been meeting with hospitals and saying this is a macro-micro exchange, which I'm trying to walk you through, so how do I function? I think about, okay, here on the micro level, how are these people's lives being impacted? And ultimately, what I'm trying to do is create a system that interfaces micro, meso, and macro systems and has a vertical integration and a feedback loop that feeds that system repeatedly around what decisions policymakers need to make different than they currently do based upon they're not being informed by micro level activity. So my organization has created what we call a think tank. And we have scientists and doctors, PhD and researchers basically extrapolating at a regional level a set of variables that are contributory to academic progress or academic trajectory is what my focus is. But when you start unpacking that, the external locus of controls which contribute to a state of being for a person's academic trajectory has very little to do with what happens in the classroom. All the things impacting them happen before they walk in the door. So in my community that I'm talking about, we have a double-digit unemployment rate. 73% of the people that come out of Allegheny County Jail come back to this particular community. 65% of the black males that graduate from high school. 76% of the households are headed by single women with children. Then you put on 20% asthma rates, 43% mobility issues, right? And then you put high school, then you got homelessness. So it's the perfect storm. So Rob asked me 6 months ago to write an article to the UK. He had heard about the work I did, and basically what I did was, and Tim, you might be interested in this, I took eco districts. You know about eco districts?
Not by name.
So eco districts is a macro level analysis of how you rebuild a community. And it looks at, it's based upon the principles of economic gardening. Anybody familiar with that?
Economic gardening?
Economic gardening
No.
principles. And basically what it talks about is if you look at a geographical location, within that location that typography presents itself with certain attributes, right? And that's why when we saw yesterday's, or was it today's presentation by Rob, when he said you can't copy what I just did in this city, it has to be different, right? This is what this is based upon. It's based upon, you can take the nuts and bolts of my thinking, but to actually apply it in this particular environment you're in, it's going to require you to revamp it. So the economic gardening principle looks at the nascent assets within a geographical location, and it begins to build on those as an asset-driven approach. We're unable to get this functional. Can you help us out? Thank you. So the work then looks at once you begin to build out what those assets are, how do you create an organic response at the grassroots level that involves vulnerable people to be participatory in the change process? Typically what happens is smart people like you and some people say myself come into a place and we see an opportunity and we begin mulling away at how to fix it. That's the simplest and easiest way to do it. Thus is the reason that this workshop is called Transformational and Transactional. That's a transactional dynamic. If I come into a place and fix it, the skill set that I'm bringing to resolve that particular social phenomenon is with me. It's not being embedded or translated into the community. It's the quickest and simplest and most cost-effective way, but it has the shortest duration of ROI, right? The other way is longer, but you have a greater ROI. And actually, if you think about what Einstein said you cannot solve a problem with the same energy that created it. Meaning that we have to resonate at different frequencies to solve social phenomena. That happens when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and fully present in a space. In that moment, we begin to see things from a different lens, cognitively and metaphysically. When we come in with the answer, we don't see things from a different lens. We see the resolution to a particular set of problems. So this notion of being a cross-cultural communicator is really about repositioning ourselves to be a better listener. And in many instances, in particular, when you're talking about dominant culture pedagogy, how do I sit back and pull back in this space and allow myself to be an instrument of change and not the change process? For example, my previous job, I was associate director of a 136-year-old organization. And nonprofits popped up all the time that wanted to do work with us. So I used to challenge them to say, okay, show me where you've worked with the community to come up with this grant you got money for. Because it's noted in our particular community, people are writing grants on behalf of vulnerable communities, and they never even see the grant. They're never participatory in the process. So I tried to put a stop to that, and basically I leveraged our organization's 136-year history against every other organization, and basically I became the police in the city of Pittsburgh for any activity that took place in the East End. If you could not show me where you were partnering with the community, I would do everything in my power to shut your project down, even with universities. So what I instituted with all of the universities I work with, I work with the University of Pittsburgh, Chatham, Carlow, CMU, and basically what I used to get from them was interns that were on a 13-week semester rotation. Now this is important, and this is the cultural context. When you're working in vulnerable communities, they're already suffering from abandonment. So now you bring in a student who they build a relationship with. The student knows and the professor knows in 13 weeks that student and that professor is going to be gone. But because it gives the university entry rates into this organic grassroots opportunity to teach kids, they jump at the chance. What they don't think about is, what is this going to do to the community? How many of these people who are going to garner relationships with these students are going to then feel a certain way at the end of 13 weeks, even though you tell them, I'm going to be gone in 13 weeks. That has no bearing on me liking you at week 9, me wanting you to stay after week 11, and you leaving at week 13. So what I said to the university, I said, have your psychology and department assess the psychological trauma that your work is doing in our community, in particular around abandonment issues, and tell me whether or not that's the best and highest use if we look at social work terms, or are you leaving this community better than you found it? And if not, we need to talk about a different methodology. So I convinced the universities to give us graduate students, doctoral students, for 5 years, right? And in cases where I got students, I wanted upper level students, they performed a task that I call bookwork or chapters. So we basically reconfigured how each of the students university-wise would work in the community, where they would actually do a set of work that was prescribed by the community as a needed task. Then they would use that work to write up and do a particular set of variables or measurable outcomes, and they would put it into a compendium of information that was then handed off to the next group of students that built on that. And there was a liaison from the community that maintained the integrity of one project to another, right? So these are the things that we tried to do to take what I would call transactional kind of activity and make it more transformational. So doesn't look like we're gonna have access to the computer, so I'm not sure what's going
Meanwhile,
on.
maybe can we just look at your
Yes,
computer?
yes, you can.
It's pretty
I
small
can-
space.
I
That
can
could
do
help a little
that.
bit.
Would you like one of us to show it around while you talk?
What I can try to
Pass-
do is
just pass
set
it?
it up
Okay.
and kind of talk about it real quickly from this angle, right? So what I'm showing you is this was a partnership with Carnegie Mellon University to recreate a community that I started working on in 2009. From that recreation, we basically look at the epicenter that's taking place in the city of Pittsburgh. So in the last 60 months in the city of Pittsburgh, in my particular community, there's been a 100% population, there's been a 100% increase in home ownership properties value, right? And about a 1 mile radius around this epicenter. There's been a 300% increase in rental property, right? So Google moved in, Kendall Metal moved in, Uber moved in, Disney moved in, Alcoa's coming, FedEx Ground is here. So in the last 100 days, there's been 6 direct international flights to Pittsburgh, right? The issue is people of color are totally unaware what does that mean for the region. Meanwhile, their community is being taken over and gentrified by people coming from different parts of the country who are making $300,000 in Pittsburgh, but have sold a house for 1,000 square feet and got $1 million on the West Coast or in New York, and they're coming to Pittsburgh and they're getting 3,000 square feet for $300,000, right? Or in my community I'm working in, our property values have increased 100%, so they went from 12,000 to 24,000 because of 40 years of disinvestment. So what you can't see is, when you look at this particular slide in 2007, when Greenberg, Kansas got wiped out by a tornado, this is what it looked like. What I would show you is, this is a community. This next slide looks similar to Greensburg, Kansas. It's been wiped out by 40 years of disinvestment, right? Now, this particular part of the property in the city of Pittsburgh is adjacent to another set of properties that collectively they constitute the 2 port census tracts in the city of Pittsburgh, with the largest contiguous flat land masses. What does that mean in layman's terms? For a developer, this is prime property. You're getting property for pennies on the dollar. It's the flattest land mass and it's contiguous, meaning that you can build blocks and blocks at a time, right? So now this community is right at the edge of the epicenter, which is transpiring in East Liberty, where Google's launched its headquarters. Google has now bought up property all around that particular area. So now property values going out a mile out are starting to increase exponentially. So what we've tried to do is look at how do you educate a community about looking at its own assets. So we trained the community indigenous research methodology in one, and the other one we changed it and trained them in community-based participatory research. So we partnered with the University of Pittsburgh and trained the community in this methodology and helped them co-author a 20-year land use study and market study to revamp their community. This started in 2008. In 2010, the plan was completed. We positioned this particular community to be the one and only and first of its kind in the country to become a green net zero community led by people of color. We went after a Choice Neighborhoods Award, and in 2014 we received $30 million for this particular community. Now I'm sharing this with you because it was 15 people of color who we trained for 6 years to look at bioswale cisterns, gray water reuse systems, geothermal systems, solar farms, urban farms. And basically, when the feds came in to meet with the community, they said that this particular community was more knowledgeable than their staff, right? But let me backtrack and say, for 6 years, what we did was we designed programs, and this is where I keep saying transactional, transformational. So I hired 9 consultants, hydrologists, engineers, architects, landscape architects. And they had two objectives. One is to mentor somebody from the community as a liaison, and two, to do a job. Like, I want you to do this set of things, right? And what do you think was their focus when the first 5 months of the work?
The
The job. So I called a timeout. Well, it was actually the first 90 days, right? Because I look at things in quarters. So I said, I see we're progressing well on the projects. I see the architectural designs are approved. We got the city's approved this project, and they're like, yeah, we're on track. I said, so who's your partner, and tell me what they're about and their interests. What do you mean? I said, each of you were supposed to select a community partner and walk them through 2 sets of dynamics, daytime meetings and evening meetings. Who's your 2 partners? We haven't done that. I said, okay, don't send me any invoices until that gets done. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, if you send me an invoice, I'm ripping it up. Until you do the first and primary objective I paid you to do, I don't care what else you do, that's secondary. Things are going to get done. Changing people's lives is the most critical thing that I'm paying for. So I wrote these grants to get that kind of outcome. So, and I said, I guarantee you, you're going to learn more from them than you teach them. Because they're way more resilient than you ever gave them credit for. Because you've never seen them, right? You're only working with them, right? You haven't seen them as I see them, right? So about 10 days into it, of course, you know, people were frustrated because I'm holding up payment. They're frustrated because people who think they want to work in environments where people live at aren't always good people. Right? And so you have to tease that out and say, hey, I know this is a limitation you might have, but let me help you. So I began to show them how to cultivate these relationships. And ultimately, I said, as an architect, you came in here thinking about helping this community from your lens. But a true architect integrates what the community needs and what your technical skills bring to bear in that environment. And tell me, have you done that? Show me where you've done that. And they couldn't. I said, so what you're producing for me is your own version of what the community needs, and not one that the community has shared with you, that they're going to own when you walk away and go to the next project. So now you understand the title, transactional activities. Even when we start looking at the community evolving, most of them are transactional by nature. What I attempt to do is reconfigure those to make them more transformational at every step of the way. When I can and when I'm responsible for authoring those projects and paying for them, I create a dynamic with my consultants that the most and highest use of their time is growing people, not the project's measurable outcome. And what I said to them is, if you do this, we will always have money coming in, because this will be the most transformational thing that's happening on the East Coast, which is why HUD ended up giving us $30 million. Because their words was, we've never seen a community this ready for transformation that had done the land use study and market study. So this is that work. We looked at the challenges of crime, vacant lots and such. Then we came up with this, I wish we could, this is a shame, but this is the dynamic. Basically, we showed the iterations of how the community would evolve, and I can pass this around over time and go from, and you guys know this, the biggest challenge in the community that's under siege is people want to do knee-jerk reactions. For example, in Pittsburgh, we have a affordable housing shortage of 21,000 units, right? So of course, everything that's going up now needs to be affordable, for the most part, based upon a tax credit or a referendum from the county or the city. So the challenge is, if you reconcentrate poverty in a place that you just tore down units, without understanding the ecological footprint, right? So if your dynamic is to create a mixed income community, how do you do that by having a haphazard knee-jerk reaction to the need for affordable housing without understanding, for example, if you use a traditional methodology, a third and a third and a third split? Give you 2 examples. This community I'm talking about right now, in the 1940s, there were 13,350 people in this community. Today, there's 1,746 people.
Yes.
Same physical space, right? The community I work in now, in the 1930s, there were 30,000 people in it. Today, there's 6,442 people in that same physical space. Right. So there's over 5,000 vacant lands and lots between this community and the other one, and they're adjacent to each other. Right. So when we start thinking about architectural design, smart cities design, and rebuilding, how do you reconfigure a community using the economic footprint as a framework for discerning whether or not you're going to do a third and a third and a third mix? Because ultimately we know in this room that if you create a mixed income community, it has a much greater capacity to survive. If you reconcentrate poverty, you end up with poverty all over again, just in newer units. So what I did was I met with the mayor last year, and I basically gave him a 6-page agreement for MOU, a memorandum of understanding for my partnership. And he said, I've never seen one of these before. And I said, well, you've never worked with me. So he saw, and he knew and gave me credit for bringing $30 million to Pittsburgh for this other project. So he knew I was kind of serious about what I was presenting to him. So I challenged him on his thinking, because think about it. Here's another transactional person. He lives in a 2 and 4 year cycle. Right? So everybody we're talking about that's going to change the environment is transactional, except the people living in it. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So from a metaphysical perspective, you cannot create transformation through transactional people. It's just, it's a counterintuitive way to grow the community. And so the flip side of that is, how do you take technically proficient people and increase their IQ around their human capacity to author other people's gifts, skills, and talents without them feeling like it's weighing heavily on them, right? So there is that reality. So as long as I'm cutting a check, which I've been blessed to be able to do that for 10 years, and I tell you, I don't care about the project, I care more about the relationship. And you get paid, everybody's happy. And what we end up with is better products. We've never produced a product that didn't benefit both the community and the funders and bring in more money. This particular community, we also work with an artist called Betsy Damon. I don't know if you know her. She's an international stormwater artist. She came in, she heard what we were doing, she was impressed with it. We worked with her for a year. We started a group called Living Waters of Loma. Also in this project, I trained the community on doing RFQs,
What's that?
requests for qualifications.
Okay.
And they work with the housing authority in the city. So they got to sit in and write those up. And they got to vet the developers, right? So when the feds came in and saw all of the things this community was engaged in, they were like, we've never seen anything like that. And now to this day, the feds used them as an example community around the whole country, right? The other thing we were able to do with this particular community was we were able to leverage tax credit dollars to build 2 projects, one with McCormick Beer and Salazar, and another one with KBK Enterprises. At the same time we were doing this, we were thinking 3-dimensionally. So not just the built environment, we were using this principle of economic gardening, saying Pittsburgh gets 67 days of sunshine a year, so we get a lot of rain. In 2010, 3 people died from a flash flood. I don't know if you guys saw that in the news. In a low-lying land where it used to be a stream, but we've paved that over for years. And just this particular day, the perfect storm hit, and it flooded this main throughway, and 3 people died. The city put $1 million bond together and basically built a train, I don't know what that's called, but the arm that comes down when the train tracks come, or a train comes. They spent $1 million on a floodgate, and it still doesn't work, right? So I went back to the mayor and said, hey, you know, what if we capture stormwater uphill from this particular site, and we mitigate 990 million gallons of water through this proposed project? So we hired a hydrologist to work with the community. We tested where water would go within this particular community and mapped it out. And then we were able to get these 2 developments that came on board to put 9 cisterns in to capture stormwater on site, right? And then we got them to bisect their deliverables of stormwater and rainwater, and we created a natural flatland downstream and captured that stormwater. Right, so this is called Project 15206, which was spearheaded by Senator Furlow, and our project was called Little Negley Run. And basically what we did was we took those two new developments, took their water off-site, put the runoff from the cisterns, ran into 15206, which led into a natural wetland. So that mitigated the stormwater overflow issue that was causing the flooding. So what we try to do, and that's what I call one of those ecological analysis, is here's this typography in this particular community, what is the best answer for this problem? So once we did that, we got Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, PWSA, to give us $500,000 to do a couple demonstration projects. All right, so in the end, this community got multiple versions of itself. We created 4 iterations of it. We created green space. There was 2 parks adjacent to this community. One is called Mellon Park, the other one's Highland Park. In both of those communities, the property values started at around $400,000 and go up to over $1 million. Right. In this community, the property value is around $12,000, and it's between both of those communities. So thinking through the ecological footprint methodology, we said, what if we created pocket parks in the daisy chain park that connected the 2 parks together? And you guys know if you build park as development, then you increase the property value, and then you start this construct for a mixed income community. So basically what we did was we got the community to come up with a new ecological footprint. Lorimer had 1,742 people. We got it to commit to 6,500 people. And then we started looking at where we can do development, market rate development, and then we used tax credits to do low income development. And then we started looking at how we can do mixed use development and reinvigorate the Main Street, which is Lorimer Avenue. So now there are the 2 developments we worked on, the 2 tax credits. Phase 1 of those are done. There's about 186 people who have moved into the community, begin to diversify it. A property that sold for $13,000 in our community 2 years ago just sold for $70,000 last month. So we're starting to see the impact of the community being transformed, and our goal now is to make sure homeowners in our community benefit from the term, and where applicable to use land trusts to preserve the land for those people who can't make that happen. So we've been working with the Burlington Foundation on that project as well. So, I wish I could show this. This is sad.
Fred, if
Yeah.
they're not using their projector next door, is it worth seeing if we could swap rooms? Is it that much of a?
Yeah, I think if you saw it, yeah.
Would you be willing to share this via email with
Yes.
the people here?
Yeah, I can do
Because
that.
I can pass around a sheet and people, if they want it, can write down their email and then I can
Yeah.
send it out later tonight.
Yeah,
If that would
I
work.
think for the impact of the presentation, it's just sad because
Yeah.
what I wanted to show you was working with this group of people. We wanted to revive the community through them thinking about how they saw the community differently. So we used the principles of eco districts, rainwater harvesting, energy production, and food production. That's really the basis of it. And so we looked at the vacant lands in that particular community and used it as a pivot to start talking about if we understood the ecological footprint of the community, now we can plan accordingly for how the vacant lots could be used differently to create both alternatives for income development through urban farming, and also how we can capture and take certain parts of the community off the grid by using solar farms. So Pittsburgh is one of 15 national and 33 international cities that got designated as 100 resilient cities by the Rockefeller Foundation 2 years ago. So we also met with the czar, Grant Irving, about that project. And in this presentation, you would have seen where we've worked with a couple of developers to take 159 units off the grid as a demonstration project. In collaboration with a local school through a STEM application of how their kids would be working on the project. And then ultimately we would use what we call a two-generation approach adopted from the theory of change out of Harvard that talks about if you increase adult capacities, you improve kid outcomes. So I start off by saying that the challenges we have in this particular community is we have 43% mobility issue, meaning parents move out. Some kids move out 1 to 3 times in the school year. What does that mean? We know that every time a kid changes schools one time, they lose an academic year metaphysically. Right? Some kids are changing schools 3 times in a year. Right? So when we start talking about are our kids on par academically, there's no way possible that this particular community can be seen as being on par given those dramatic situations. So, and I'll share this with you and hopefully you'll look at it and have some appreciation. So I want to pause because I've said a lot and give people a chance to kind of comment, ask questions before I go into the next phase. Yes?
What kind of entity or group are you with it? At first I thought you were a developer or a nonprofit developer, but it sounds like that's not the case. So what kind of entity is it?
The first entity I was with to describe this work was a based upon Elizabethan poor concept. It's called a oh man, what's the term we use? It's like oh man, what's the name of the term? I forgot. I'm not there anymore, but it's like a house or a place where you teach people social skills, self-help skills. So basically in the turn of the century when the steel mills came to Pittsburgh, settlement houses, was called a settlement house.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
The settlement house movement. So this is a settlement house that's 136 years old. So it's moved around the community. That particular project, I was the associate director. We work with 160,000 people a year in 44 zip codes in the city of Pittsburgh.
Was that a nonprofit?
It was a nonprofit.
But it's on the settlement house.
On the settlement house concept, right?
Okay.
It's called the Kingsley Association.
Oh.
And I worked there and was able to do stuff. I actually made the connection with Transition Towns, created Urban Transition Cities movements there and did the $30 million project.
You must be like 79 years old.
We're like 4 people in one.
I'm close. I'm close. So that project, the range of people we work with income-wise was between $10,000 to $200,000 who walked through our doors. So we had to be very nimble and diverse. We had a pool. It was a 56,000 square foot facility.
Oh.
Right. So it was quite sizable, and it was right at the. If we can see this, you can see it. And when you look at this, you'll see it. It'll be identified in the slide. Right. And basically, it had for years provided services in an array of ways to this community. So I was responsible for 4 program areas: family services, education and training, health and wellness, and community engagement. Right. So I was the person who wrote the grants and designed the programs that kind of interface with the community. So 2 years ago, I left there and I became the president and CEO of something called the Homewood Children's Village. Homewood Children's Village is akin to the Harlem Children's Zone. It's a byproduct or spin-off of the Harlem Children's Zone out of Harlem. What's of interest to me is when I went there last year. Yeah. The project now I work on, and I like to think about these things in aggregates, right? So the community I'm talking about now is called Homewood. Like I said, in the 1930s, there was 30,000 people in it. Today, there's 6,442 people. 2,200 of them are kids. We work with 1,100 of those kids already, so we're at half the end. I have a team of about 70 staff. We work in 5 schools now, and we're in 4 community centers. I just started a project last month called Skunkworks. Anybody know what Skunkworks is? Anybody heard of the term?
Well, the original Skunkworks.
Yeah.
Computer driven. I mean, isn't that where they started? Some of the first computers came out of Skunkworks. Is that?
Well, the first Skunkworks project came out of McDonnell Douglas's relationship with the federal government in World War II. When they were commissioned to create a jet fighter plane to counteract the MiGs that were shooting down Mustangs, right? So what they figured out is that if you sequester your best and brightest people and put them on a high proposition opportunity within your corporation, your ROI is exponential, right? So they created a plan, that government challenged them with creating a plan in 169 days, and they did it in 157, something like that, right? But the contract they got from that changed the whole landscape. So those are the kind of things. So I just graduated from Innovation Leaders Institute that was ran by Carnegie Bosch Institute at Carnegie University. And I was in a room with 20 people from around the world. And there was one of Bosch's departments that they gave $500,000 or 3,000 innovators a year to innovate. And I said, so what if they don't come up with anything? Do they get fired? They're like, no, one of their ideas pays for the whole thing. So I was like, hold on, you mean if I was one of those guys, I would get $500,000 to go and spend however I want to innovate, and if nothing happens, I would still have my job?
Yeah.
They're like, yes, right? So that gave me an idea, right? So I went to our funder, and I went to Google, Covestro, Kennametal, Thermo Fisher Scientific. I went to 5 what I thought were budding entrepreneurs who was doing well, and I asked them to collaborate with us to create a Skunkworks for nonprofits. So I just had 7 of my staff pass whatever this test was. We had them take to become members of Skunkworks. And basically what we were able to do was sequester them. I'll be sequestering them starting next month, twice a month, off campus. So they'll take one full, they'll have 2 focuses. One is to innovate. We've grown, we've doubled in the 2 years I've been there. You know what that means organizationally. There's all kind of stress factors inside your operational system. We've grown both in size and income. So what I want to do is I have, the other challenges I have is 2/3 of my staff are millennials. So, you know what that means, right? You know what that means?
Not really. I mean, I hear a lot of comments about millennials, but I don't have a real good sense of why.
Millennials are very technically proficient, and they grew up, and this is an exaggeration, but they grew up believing that as long as they participated, they all won, they all got trophies. So they grew up in that era. So they have a high need for validation. They have a high need for being told that they did something right. They have a high need for having their social needs met while at work. Just a lot of things that were cultivated by their parents, being helicopter parents, and everything was a win for them even when they didn't win. Right? So it's a challenge working with them because they're very technically proficient. They know what they want to do. They're very social minded as far as doing social good, but they haven't put the pieces together what kind of muscle it takes to do social good. It's not a theoretical framework. It's metaphysical. You got to think through some things, do some things, and have some heavy lifting involved with it. So after having a few challenges with my millennials, one of them actually gave me this idea to start Skunkworks, which I thought was a safe way to take the ingenuity of the millennials and have them tackle organizational problems, and then have them make recommendations and say, and let them see, like, does that recommendation really work in a safe environment, right? Some cases it will, some cases it won't, but the goal is that you put them in a place where they have practical application of knowledge in real time to resolve a real issue that's meaningful to the organization. So then they can't walk away and say, well, that wasn't that important. Yes, it's important, because you're reporting to the executive team your recommendations every week. Right? So you can't like blow it off like, this is important and I'm paying you to do this. So I'm sequestering them twice a month. Once a month, we'll do internal analysis of problems. The second time, they'll be taken to a hotel, and we'll be bringing in, like Google will be kicking us off to do a full-day workshop, innovate with them, look at some fee-for-service models. The other thing is, when I came on board to my nonprofit now, I started to change our culture to think of our work as more entrepreneurial and not nonprofit. So we use Jim Collins' work, Good to Great. So we start looking at the flywheel concept. whether or not we got the right people on the bus, or what's our flywheel, do we have level 5 leaders? This was important for me as a nonprofit because if you look at what I'm saying is the external locus of control in Pittsburgh, we have all these corporations moving in. And there's a disconnect between how corporations attract local talent and bring them on board. For example, right now the Allegheny Conference in the city of Pittsburgh is recruiting 30,000 people from around the world to come work in Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, local students aren't even being picked up to do entry-level jobs. Right? So I'm talking to the mayor, I'm like, okay, how is it that you can skip over all of these people with this skill set and we're not figuring out a way to onboard them? So I just took it upon myself to go meet with the corporations myself. And I'm doing MOUs with them for a 3-phase approach, and this is the second part of Skunkworks. Is that as I partner with them and they present to us, we're going to be doing internships, entry-level job opportunities, and then we're going to do this, look at their soft underbelly and discern whether or not there's areas that we can grow people's skill set and that they will keep on hiring. So everybody seems interested in that. So that's one of the things that we're doing that'll be our innovation zone or innovation center kicking off. The other set of work I wanted to talk to you about, which is better illustrating all 3 of the continuums I talked about at the micro, meso, and macro level is, I shared with you the community I'm working in now. It was 30,000 people, now there's 6,442 people, 2,200 kids. We have twice the national asthma rate, 43% mobility, 41% poverty, 76% single-headed household, on and on and on. So what I'm trying to do is stop the bleeding, right, of people leaving out. So I partnered with the school board, the superintendent, and Google to start a coding program. So we're going to roll that out. But what I did was, I was in a series of high-level meetings with the mayor and some of his staff around the issue of community development at a macro level. And so what typically happens in that, if those of you who've been in those meetings, the city comes up with an idea, they want to bring in the best talent to support the idea, so they usually hire a consultant from some other place. Right, so I've been in about 100 of those meetings, and I got frustrated a couple months ago, and so I stormed out. And I told people I was storming out. I said, if you hire one more consultant, I'm leaving, because there's local talent here that you're overlooking. I said, this is a transaction. It's not about transformation. Every time you pay for somebody outside of here, they're on retainer for the rest of their duration with us. But if you make that investment in a local person or local organization, you can grow their ability to meet your needs, and you can go in their office anytime you want and get whatever you want. You won't have to be on a retainer, it'll be on a relationship. So I walked out the meeting and they stopped and called a timeout. I don't know what happened after I left, but a couple days later, State Representative Ed Gainey and another state rep called me up and said, we heard you. I said, so what does that mean? And they said, we want to hire local talent to do this project. So could you give us some recommendations? So I gave them some recommendations, and they said, well, why didn't you use you? I said, that's duplicitous. You know, you asked me for recommendations. I can't dare turn around and say me, you know, but certainly I think we have the skill set to do what you're asking for, but I think there's other talented people. So they asked us to take up this work. And basically what my team was able to do, and I can see this too, it's a very comprehensive regional-wide analysis of about 6 sectors of the community that were struggling. And as a macro level response, what was the state? So let me back up and say, for the first time in the history of Pittsburgh, there's 5 black elected officials working together. 2 state reps, county commissioner, and 2 councilmen. Never happened before. So they had a bright idea to do these regional assessments of community issues, inform and extrapolate from them what are some of the highest issues the community has discerned that they want to attack, and then come into this phase of doing some work. Once again, we're talking about transactional people, right? They're on 2-year and 4-year cycles, right? So they hired us to come in and do some work, and we did some phenomenal work, and it kind of exposed them to like, oh, we should think about this work differently. And I was like, yes, you should think about this work differently. Actually, if you do it in a transformational way, you can really grow your fan base differently, because you'll be changing their lives, not being transactional by giving them turkeys and computers and TVs at your annual events. So they kind of agreed. So we did this core work for them, came up with these regional approaches and extrapolated recommendations in the six core areas that got knocked out the box. So now we're in phase 2 of the work, which we started last Saturday, and now we're implementing that on the ground. So what we're trying to do is get them to look at local assets in their community to tackle those 6 areas strategically and pragmatically, and use the leverage of their place in the ecosystem to bring resources to bear to work in those areas, right? So ultimately, to put that in simple terms, we got them to coordinate their effort on the ground with nonprofits and with governmental agencies to tackle all 6 of those problems in a very pragmatic way. So we're actually designing a regional-wide dashboard for them to look at how, because nobody's measuring this, what is the collective impact of that across the region. Everybody's measuring the impact at a community level, right? So here's my biggest challenge. When I went to Harlem, my community I'm working in right now is 1 square mile, and theirs is 1 square mile. They have 97,000 people. I have 6,442 people. The Harlem Children's Zone has a $126 million budget. I do not have a $126 million budget. They got 2,100 staff. I got 2,200 kids. Right? They got 32 programs. I got 10. Like under one mindset. They serve 26,000 children and adults. We serve 1,100. So the scale of the problem for me was like the first discernible thing I took away from that was like, wow, we should be able to fix this, right? So what I've come back and kind of done with our team is we just revamped our whole organization, and we've merged 2 departments together, and I created this innovation zone, which is our Skunkworks project. And we put together, we basically have what we call a Cradle to Career pathway. So there's 6 sectors, and you'll see this in the presentation, where we look at bringing families in from with kids 0 to 5 in our Baby Promise program, all the way to careers when they actually get a job. We don't count success when a kid goes to college. We count success when a kid gets a job, right? So what we've done is we've widened our berth for taking people in our Baby Promise project, which is what I'll call micro activity, and we've increased their IQ around what we're calling the 72 variables, both qualitative and quantitative, that you should look at before a family transitions a kid from one grade level to another. So there's 6 sectors of transition in the academic trajectory of a person, right? For example, before a kid enters kindergarten, they should have heard 10,000 words, right? So for example, in a poor community where you got a single mother with 2 or 3 kids, who's reading that many books to those kids and who's tracking that? No fault of her own or his own if it's a single dad. They're trying to survive. But you're putting your child at risk of not being able to even come in on par. So we've created this variable, what we're calling our early warning system, where our research and evaluation department is analyzing these qualitative and quantitative measurable outcomes, and then discerning whether or not a family should transition. So we're having case managers work with those families to ensure that they're ready to transition, and if not, we're saying to them, time out, we think you need some additional support before you transition. So that's our work on the micro level. On the meso level, we've reconfigured and reconvened all of our core partners to be in line with our thinking or the thinking of the region. So basically what that means is we've designed 9 phases of collaboration. So we've looked at sharing resources, transparency, data sharing, joint grant writing, aligning meetings together. And you know, it's these core things that a lot of nonprofits don't do well together. Like we don't share our books well with each other. So what we do is, what you would have saw in the presentation is,
So we have another room upstairs we could move to if you want to try
how much more
that.
time do we have?
It goes until 2:45, so we have about an
Oh.
hour left. Or we could take the computer upstairs, see
Test
if it works
Yes.
first.
Yeah, why don't y'all do that, and then what I'll do, if we can do that, move upstairs, I'll flash through the stuff so y'all can
Yeah.
see it, and I'll stop so you guys can ask questions, right?
The system's already set up, so it's just a
Thank you. So, at the meso level, so, okay, 2 years ago when I came into the organization, I had a issue. We had got a $2.5 million grant, which I didn't have issue with.
That wasn't the issue. That wasn't the issue.
But the issue was, I asked my senior staff, who do we write it for? Because in my 35 years of doing this work, I've always written a grant because it's somebody motivated me that I met in the community. So I was like, so who, name the person you wrote the grant for? And they were like, what do you mean? I'm like, was it Mr. John that you met? Was it Mr. Bill? Was it Kathy? They were like, no, we just did research. So my team is like PhD driven researchers, right? So they're looking at best practices on a global level. So I get that. But it has to be tangible for people on the ground. Once again, if you go back to the ecological footprint analysis and ecological gardening principles, right? If you don't know the people's needs in those geographical areas, then it doesn't matter what you design for them, it's not going to work. So when I asked them the question, they were like, we just did best practices and came up with this model and we won an award. I was like, oh wow, okay. I was saddened by that because the community that I'm working in now is my home community, so I forgot to tell you that. So I'm coming back home where I was a school teacher, a probation officer, a football coach, 10 years, all of that. So I left the city for 10 years, went to Charlotte, was a dean of students there, taught at John C. Smith University, did some stuff at Olympic High School. I did the Bill and Melinda Gates Small Schools concepts, all of that kind of stuff. Right, so I'm 80 now, I'm 85 now.
Getting up there.
I'm getting up there.
That's kind of record.
So when I came back, you know, I was like, okay, wow, we got this money, but do you know anybody in the community? So I initially called a timeout and said to all my staff, everybody in this building has to have 5 unduplicated community contacts per quarter. I'm going to take money out the budget so you could take them to lunch, give them coffee, I don't care what it is, but you're mandated to do that. And I want to see it tracked every quarter. Every 100 days, we have a clearinghouse called the 100-day event, which we're up, we're
It
good?
works, it's all connected if you guys want to shuffle it.
You guys
I
want
think
to
you
shuffle?
should finish your
Yeah.
sentence.
Okay, send this. So I'll finish this. So for every 100 days, we have a transparency on the public side. We invite all of our stakeholders, all these 5 community contacts per quarter, and we give ourselves a grade from A to F on about 15 vectors, right? And the community sees us in our most vulnerable state. And they get to weigh in on stuff that we did right, what we didn't do right. Because the community I'm working is not that transparent. They're not transparent with how they do things for a lot of reasons. And what we're trying to do is remove the veil of what's going on and saying, here's what's going on, and we're accountable. We get public grant dollars to support you. There's no secret. We have a 990 that goes out every year. You can pull it up and look at it. Like, you can see how much I make on there. It's not hidden, right? So to walk around and act like we don't have mistakes and we're not accountable for them is fraudulent for me. So that's changed the whole landscape for us because a lot of my partners are uncomfortable with that. They're comfortable with me doing it, but they're not comfortable doing it themselves. And that's part of the 9 areas of collaboration is around transparency, is being transparent. And what I tell them is this: if your organization is not doing well in certain areas, you don't think people know that? They don't, I mean, you know, like, it's not a secret that you're not doing well in those areas. I'm just willing to be honest and say we're not doing well. And I'm also opening up to be inclusive to say, this is a strength we don't have. So if you really understand good to great, right? It talks about your hedgehog, right? We have a myriad of things we're trying to fix. There's no way we can have a panacea on it. We're not God, right? So we need to pull back and do what we do better than anybody else. And people that do things better than us, it's okay to collaborate and partner with them. So the second half of what we've achieved in the 2 years is we went from 0 community contacts to 955. At the meso and macro level, we went from zero contacts to 1,857.
And you said it was things like a lunch out or a coffee out.
Coffee, tea, just a
contact.
Just a contact, right?
Like a conversation.
A conversation. And say, ask them 5 questions. What do you know about the village? Right? How you feel we've been doing? Right? What can we do better?
So how do they document these?
Take notes and bring them back. We do a survey and we invite those people in. So all of our stuff is data driven. So we use SurveyMonkey like crazy. But it's our litmus test. It's our, you know, how we take the pulse of our work. So the second phase of that is, I said that you'll see the pipeline. I'll show you that upstairs. But once I realized we couldn't manage the whole thing, it was better to get partners that did things better than us. So we then began to start looking at who are our partners at the next level. And we went from realistically 8 partners we were doing work with kind of well to 150 with another 1,800 we haven't tapped into yet. So when I say meso and macro, I'm talking about I have business cards from people from all around the country who want to do work with us that we just haven't even been able to find time to even pull them out of the atmosphere to work with us yet. And once I show you the stuff upstairs, it kind of will make sense to you. But that's kind of what I would call the micro, meso, and macro approach. And then what we've done to look at the information feedback loop to drive policy is we've looped our research and evaluation department into all 3 of those levels. And then what we do now is when I'm sitting in a meeting, because I'm a commissioner for the city, so I approve, since I've been a commissioner, about 4,000 units coming to the city of Pittsburgh. And I asked the mayor and I said, hey, you know, I'm approving units that I can't live in. I can't afford to live in. Like I feel duplicitous being on this panel as a commissioner, and you know, 85% of the stuff I'm approving, I can't live in myself with my family. You know, and I'm not poor. You know, I'm gonna sit here and be honest, I'm not poor. So, you know, that sparked this big thing. If you look at Pittsburgh right now, you see all this effort around affordable housing going up. I'm calling a timeout because I don't want a knee-jerk reaction. Let's be strategic around where are we talking about putting the units and how does it drive and become catalytic to the development we're talking about in the region. So this is 40 years of disinvestment. So the community came up with this plan, this roadmap. We looked at the challenges and assets, so we did an internal analysis with the community. And then we came up with this stabilizing framework for looking at the pivot. So looking at how we stabilize the community, look at consolidated resources, how we grow it economically and secure it, how we diversify and look at increasing resiliency, and then how we sustain it. So this is a 20-year plan in the making of how we transform the community from what it was in 1940 to 2035. And then you can see the Kingsley Association where I told you about the 56,000 square foot facility, and it's at the epicenter of where around this community are 3 vibrant communities that are thriving, where property values are around $400,000 and going up around it, while this community's houses is $12,000, $18,000. This is the first community plan that they came up with. So you see the urban garden, the green village, retail use, and expanding the Highland Park, where we talked about the expanding the park and creating a daisy chain over to Mellon Park, which is down at the bottom, and Highland Park. So but these 2, Highland Park and Mellon Park, are where Shady Side And Point Breeze are, Highland Park is another affluent community, and right between that you see this poor community. So this is another revisioning that we had when we worked with the URA to use scatter site development and actually create a highlighted park use development using recreation. This was initially a conversation we had with the universities about putting their physical plants there to kind of make this a central zone for a lot of activity. And what you can see right down here is one of the only in the world targets that's inside the urban setting that's raised off the ground. And it's the only one in the world, in the country that we know of like that. So as we moved into this net zero framework, this is our second iteration of redesigning the park. And as you can see from this, well, that's the third one. See how the green space is that big around the upper, where it say recreational complex and expansion and farm. See how big that green space is? As you can see, it changed over the years that we did the project to this kind of landed on this one, because we had an expert come in and say that managing that much green space wasn't feasible. So they said basically, let's do some cones. So our next iteration was this one, which is our new master plan that we're working on. So this is our property treasure sales for houses that are going up, city-owned, URA-owned, and property-owned. This is the pivot, a lot of stuff I talked to you guys about. And then we moved into this notion of how do we create living cities. So for us, it was about how you integrate technology into the focus of community formation, which actually creates transformation. So for us, it's using eco-districts, and this is where Rob asked me to write an article back to the UK about how I integrated transition towns into eco-districts, which I submitted to him several months ago. And I can try to get you guys a copy of that as well. And then so we looked at how do we scale this stuff up, using the scaling framework as well, and looking at project scalability and time required to create these things. And these are some of the ideas that got percolated from the community. And this is when I took the 14 people to Portland. This is us working in Portland in April, and basically looking at how we make decisions, how we do organizational learning, looking at legal structures and financial resources. We worked with 2 teams from South Africa while we were there as well. And so here's the idea factory. So we started looking at community and said, what if we took your street and did this to it? What if we were more intentional about how you change your community? What if we took cars off the street, which were emitting CO2 emissions? And because I don't know, my neighbor hasn't spoken to me yet in the 2.5 years we've been there. She speaks to my wife, she's never spoken to me. I speak to her, I had my kids shovel her snow. We cut her grass at times. And so, I'll keep trying to be a good guy, but what if we took away cars and created vegetable gardens in front of everybody's house, and you can only grow certain vegetables, which will cause you to have to come over to your house, to Kathy's house, to get cucumbers. Right? So it would be intentional about creating ways that people have to integrate, have to meet and mingle with each other. Right? So this is one of the ideas we've been working on. And then we put it to work, and this is one of those, me giving you an analysis of what micro work looks like. So it's this informal service delivery unit where we're bringing people who have an interest in the community work together to do real tangible things that transform the community. At the meso level, this is us working with, that's Kim, and he works for the URA. That's Ted to the right of him. He works for a nonprofit. That's Mary, she works for another nonprofit. The other 3 people of color are community people. And that's us working on a vignette and coming back with looking at what the community had brought up as ideas they wanted to bring to bear. This is us getting a $30 million check. That's the mayor in the right-hand corner. Behind him is the councilman. It's people, that's Castor from the URA. That's our county exec. That's Miss Betty. And that's Miss Peaks. Those are the 2 people I kind of trained over the last few years in this work. So I got an idea to start this urban transition cities movements. I wanted to find out a way to bring more people of color to transition towns, so I started my own version with permission from the UK. And we trained 37 people of color for the first time in the history that we know in the whole transition time movement that many people of color ever got trained at one time. So how do you develop a transformational mindset? I think it's how you reconfigure your relationships and your power base at the micro level. I speak a lot about the mayor because I confront the mayor a lot. I try to hold him accountable as a public official. I invited him and he spoke at our 100th-day event. And we have a relationship, but as a public servant, I expect him to be accountable to the community. So I put him on the spot in front of 300 people and asked him questions about his policies, his decision-making process and whatnot. He kind of looked at me side-eyed, but he appreciated that. What I try to do is remove the dynamic that happens in vulnerable communities. We see high-level people from TVs, but not in person. We don't get to interface with them. So I try to bring all of those people to the community. And so that room is full of the Black elected officials with community stakeholders that we get to have face-to-face conversations with. This is what my 100-day events look like. Every 100 days we have this kind of event where the community comes out. And basically, like I said, we have a report card, we give ourselves a grade, and usually there's a line of people that want to talk to me about stuff they think they can help with, which is the whole purpose of being transparent. Our scoreboard is when we have what we call a series of mini cafes. People walk around and they meet each of our staff and their programs that they're working on. They get to ask intimate questions about that work. Back to the epicenter. This is Larmer, that community I talked about, and this is where we see phase 2 going up. Also, I designed this thing on your left. It's called Imagine Larmer. It's a software-based project where you can take it anywhere in the world. It's based on Google Earth platform, and basically it allows you to look at when you pull trees down into the atmosphere. It looks at the CO2 exchange that happens between trees coming in and creating an air exchange, so it reduces CO2 emissions. So it's just a model that kind of gives people an idea when you bring certain things into the environment. You can see at the top, it's a dashboard, and right now her affect is flat, the little girl. But as you move more things into the environment, trees, park benches, and flowers, she smiles, she begins to smile more. So there's a real need to really kind of show people how to change people's state of being. This is that original tax credit I talked to you about that we got on to pipe their water into 156 and Little Negley Run. And Little Negley Run is that area strip of road to the top of the screen where we ported the water down to a flat landing we're using to capture stormwater. The other thing we did was, because we use tax credits and work with the URA in the city, we designed a comparable LEED certification framework with the Green Enterprise Checklist framework. So we did a crosswalk of both of those. So then when we met with developers who were doing either one, we can use that framework as a check balance for whether or not their project would meet our metrics as a community. This is some proposed site for new development. This is the houses that our team approved and looked at. And when I say our team, these are community people. We've had developers have to redo their architectural drawings up to 3 times because they didn't agree with the final drawings. And this is all happening. So this is beyond concept to reality. Actually, this is the project now that's going into phase 2. This phase is finished. And this is, we were pushing real hard on this project because it was an entryway, and Larmer's this street right here at the bottom. So we wanted to make sure that it popped as people came into the community, they could actually see transformation taking place. And this is what the houses look like.
Wow. Wow.
All right. And then this is us looking at the existing streets, proposed streets, and how we're capturing stormwater. All right. Housing types. And this is what the finished product looks like. So now I talked to you about the transformation that's taking place at the epicenter in East Liberty where Google's at, and Google's right down the street, but this is East Side 2 where they've just put 359 units up. Flats starting at $1,875, 1 bedroom's going for $2,100, 2 bedrooms $2,200, 3 bedrooms $2,400, and condos for $3,000. So all you guys know that they had to have a performer for that, right? And I'm just like, as a commissioner, I'm still saying, who are you building this stuff for? Because the average income in our community is not that high, besides the Google people coming on board. So this is 90% done right now as well. So I know there's a person, I was eating lunch at lunch with them, they're coming to Pittsburgh next week. I want to show them around and let them see what's going on. So I use the term all the time around cross-cultural nuances is, there's a train that has left the station in Pittsburgh. The train is around sustainable community design and the corporate takeover. So how do we get vulnerable people to realize that the train has left the station and what's their role in that? So this is where we start talking about transformational activity. At the micro level, it's designing what I would call community-based projects like the Alarmer Consensus Group, Living Waters Alarmer. These are all community-driven activities. At the meso level, Kingsley is a nonprofit, GTEC's a nonprofit, Grow Pittsburgh, all of those are nonprofits. Now they all work in their own interest areas. And what I'm saying to you is, as a transformational leader, it's incumbent upon you to get them to realign their work so that you have a cumulative impact of their work in your particular geographical location. Because heretofore they do not do that. And they have nobody that's challenging them to do that. And then at the macro level, working with the universities, the Parks Conservancy, the Affordable Housing Task Force, the mayor's office, how do we get the mayor and decision makers to look differently at their decision making per community? So what's next? This is up. Google created a micro units across from their building. They took space in the building and rehabbed it. Then across the street, they built a new building. And then they start building housing for their staff on that same site. So that made me pivot and think about creating a Homewood Children's Village Innovation Lab, which is a Skunkworks project. And basically this is where I'm at today. This is that Homewood community I talked to you about. There are 41 vulnerable communities in Allegheny County with 80,000 vulnerable people in them. 46,000 of those people are on probation and parole. So when I start talking about the challenges, like it's not just getting people a job, it's overcoming those barriers, right? So there's 3 of the 41 vulnerable communities that I'm responsible for, right? So my innovation has to be about how do you take vulnerable people from a place of their destitute existence to one where they can compete in a global economy. So my co-founders are Dr. Wallace and Aaliyah Durham, who's working on a doctorate as well. I talked to you about our asthma rates, poverty rates, and such. So what I did this past year was move our number from 1,100 kids to 700 as I adopted the 2-generation approach, because I wanted to go deeper with 700 kids and also take on 350 of their caregivers, expand the number of schools we're in and facilities that we're in. We use School of Social Work MSW students for mental support in the school systems. So we have a partnership with them as well. And then we track 124 kids in college right now. The new orientation that I was telling you about, I just changed before I walked in the door, is I have new offices, which is the Office of Child and Community Health, Office of Academic Performance, Office of Innovation, Office of Research and Evaluation, and our administrative office. And now we're looking at those barriers and how we tackle them strategically and pragmatically. So this is our pivot. So we use 4 C's to do our work: convene partners, coordinate services, build capacity, and support community. Each of these are 100-day events that we facilitated and or worked in collaboration with the community on bringing stakeholders to the community. So this 2-generation model is really about how do we stabilize the community and make parents the first teachers again, because a lot of times parents have abdicated their power to the schools, and we want to re-empower them to be parents all over again. So we use the theory of change. You guys should look at this video if you get a chance. It's very informative. I don't care what your work is. This will help you understand it in a different light. It's about 6 minutes long. But basically, this theory of change out of Harvard is very impactful about looking at stressors. And ultimately, it says that the brain elasticity to educate a person is still viable up to the age of 35. So we can still train people, but not through the traditional methodology. We have to use non-traditional approaches. So part of the challenges we have today is that people are used to doing stuff the way that they've always done it. And the real challenge is getting systems to think outside the box on how they can deliver that same work through a different context. And that's kind of what we do is we give them statistical data to support the pivot or the shift. This is one of our projects we were working on. So I didn't tell you that I'm also, I co-chair 2 groups out of Berkeley with the Cancer-Free Economy, and I was telling you how I'm trying to do this crosswalk between PM10 and PM2.5. So what I was able to do with 2 developers is that we're working with is we've created a red list and a green list for building material because we're looking at off-gassing material that causes triggers for asthma rates. So we're trying to get developers to use this green building material. So we have 2 developers who have started to ask us for the list, and we're using the scientists out of Berkeley and chemists to kind of give us up-to-date lists on a frequent basis. So if you go back and look at this project, when I was sharing with you before, we wanted to put a living lab here with geothermal systems, bioswale cisterns. This is the high school. This is the project we wanted to take off the grid. We got permission from the city to take it off the grid. However, when we did the soil sample here, it was 10 times allowable lead content.
Wow.
Think about this. There's 5,000 vacant lands and lots in this community. The first one we sampled had 10 times allowable lead content on it. So we had to move that project to another site. This is another project, a gateway to another school. So what we try to do is tie these projects to the science departments at the school so we can do hands-on learning at the schools and also introduce this 2-generation approach into the school so parents can get more involved in their kids' academic performances. So we look at this ecosystem, how we get there. You know, the other thing I did when I came on board is I flattened our organization from a hierarchy to just 2 levels. There's an executive level, which I sit on, and self-directed teams. Each self-directed team has co-chairs. So we're looking at our sustainability plan as an organization and succession planning. So I pick my successor 90 days in to the new job, and I begin to prepare that person to replace me whenever that time comes. But I don't ever want my organization to be in a position where we don't have strong leadership and people don't know what's going on. So every week the executive team meets and their co-chairs meet with them. They have daily briefings at 8:20 for 10 minutes to give updates. And we really increase the knowledge base internally in the organization. So I said to you about the pipeline. We've expanded that, and we now have baby promise on the far end. And as I said, these 6 transition points in a person's academic trajectory, there's about 72 variables we're measuring across each of those domains. And as a family shows promise in those areas, we're kind of giving them the green light to move to the next level. Here's our strategies for collaboration. And then here's our 2-generation model. And if you look at it, it's basically Maslow's hierarchy of need as a framework. You know, food, shelter, basic needs, psychological needs, self-actualization. We also created this Urban Leadership Institute. We've trained 75 people so far in 16 weeks. And basically, we have 8-week programs where we have 30 to 40 people from the community come in that we actually are dumping into the model stuff I'm talking to you about. We're bringing experts from the field in to talk to them face to face. They're councilmen, they're state rep, and they're basically able to hear from them directly what they're doing. And what that's doing now is it's causing them to go back into the community and share information with their constituents and then ask us deeper questions, which was the intent of that work. The community I'm working in is broken into 9 sectors. So when we did the ULI, it's intergenerational. So there's 28 minimal people that's involved with that. So we try to get a male and female from each cluster and one kid from the school to make one team. We're working on, we have a partner, Bible Center Church has the first of its kind direct current bioshelter with aquaponics farm in it. It's a partnership with the University of Pittsburgh. And then our Eco Districts model is really looking at how we integrate that into what we call community and schools concept. So we use the full service community schools model. So when you look at that from the school side, it's academic health and wellness and extended learning opportunities for kids. When you're at the parent, it's parent resources, continuing education, and job training. And so when we do this work and look at how we transform the community, I talked to you about Pittsburgh has 3 very significant things going on. We're a city that receives 100 resilient cities. We have the P4 conference work taking place there. And the Allegheny Conference has been critical in really moving big level issues. So I don't know if you heard about Heinz's P4 work, people, planet, place, and performance. I'm nearing year 2 of that work as well, so we're working with them as well. So what we've done is, I like to think about ROIs. So we've come up with this metrics for looking at this work. And basically it's based on 3 factors: long-term, mid-term, and short-term. And for each one of these, there's an ROI. Based upon the Government Policymakers Foundation's report, for every dollar invested in short-term outcomes, and they're over here on the right-hand side, you get $5.10 return on investment. The same $1 for lifelong learning and the activity on the right-hand side gets you $5.50. For that same $1 in long-term outcomes and community renewal, you get another $6. So which key is up there is home ownership and things like that. But basically, what I'm creating is a model where for every dollar invested, you get $16.60 rate of return on investment. Because I don't like to talk in hypotheticals when I talk to government entities. I like to say, if you don't invest in this, this is the cost, right? If you do invest, here's what you reduce your cost in. So here are some of our core partners we're currently working with. That's it.
That's all.
So I thought that I'll send you the slide deck some kind of way, but I thought if you saw the slide deck, it would contextualize what I was saying downstairs a little bit differently. This is just some of the stuff we're doing. I can't put all of it into context, but I thought from a transition times perspective, what I did and what I think Rob appreciated was, I walked into the room yesterday and it was me and maybe one other person of color. And I keep saying, okay, all right, this is never going to reach a critical mass until people of color become more participatory. And it's not just money. Money is not the variable all the time. People throw money at the problem. It's not just money, it's relationships. You can't get people of color to leave their family for 3 days to come somewhere where they're probably not going to be treated well, right? It's not just, you can't just pay for that. There has to be some relationship developed that cultivates a person's trust to come somewhere and actually have to feel like they're going to be honored, heard, and respected. And I think we typically, as academicians and practitioners, we typically just try to get stuff done. And what I'm saying and what I've tried to demonstrate to you today is my staff and my team, we're not just about getting things done. If you don't bring the community along, if I can't see that, what I didn't tell you is in my first year, I let 13 people go because they refused to interface with the community. I asked them to leave or they decided to leave because the pressure was on to interface with the community. And it was alarming to me. These are very, very smart people. And I said, you can't take them out for coffee? I'm uncomfortable. I didn't come here to do that. I'm a researcher. I was like, wow, okay, well, thank you for your service. We really appreciate what you contribute to the organization, but we're pivoting. And I don't believe as a person who receives the amount of resources I do that I can act in good conscience without the community weighing on what we're doing and being in partnership with us. So that's kind of my position. My board knows that, my staff knows that, and people will not be with us in the next quarter if they don't meet those metrics. It's not if, it's when. You know, the most important thing to me is building relationships with the community, not the products. That will come, but it's more fruitful when the community is involved with the process and they own a piece of it. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes.
What do you mean by pivot?
Pivot, before I got to my organization, 85% of our resources were driven towards kids. I'm trying to make that about a 60-40 split now, 60% to kids, 40% to parents. Because parents, a kid being homeless ain't because the kid didn't do homework. It's because the parent didn't have a stable job, right? So if we keep putting money into a kid, I'm losing 43% of them every year. I couldn't go to our funder and ask for $100,000, and when I take the check, say, I'm not going to be able to account for $43,000. I already know that when I take the check. I just told my board I couldn't, in good conscience, keep that up. So it took me 8 months to convince everybody that this going smaller and deeper was a better thing in providing services. So all those partners up there in that pipeline, we basically control 2 components of the pipeline, the beginning and the end. Our partners do the middle, and we basically manage that relationship. So that we don't do housing, we're never going to put a brick in the ground. We give technical assistance to housing, we might tell them what kind of material to use, but we're never going to put a brick in the ground. That's not what we do. So we partner with people to do that. So our partner, Operation Better Block, has agreed to do affordable housing and renter to home ownership programs for our clientele. So those are the kind of relationships we cultivate to kind of deal with the issues that we're confronting. But the pivot is really, we can no longer put money into kids when kids aren't the reason that they're homeless and have to move and things like that. Yes?
So do you have any of these materials online or anything that we could, is the Lerner, is this all online?
Yeah, Larimer Consensus Group stuff's online.
Okay.
Our stuff is online.
Do you have the?
Yep. I will have to get you the WordPress for Larimer, but if you look at Larimer Consensus Group, it should take you to their website, and their plan is online, and my website is Homewood Children's Village, www.homewithchildrensvillage.org.
Okay.
And then I'll make sure that you guys get, and I will send you, who do I send it to you?
Yeah.
I will send you the supplemental stuff I told you about. And I can send you, I don't know, you tell me what you want. I have a one-pager on Skunkworks, some of our outcomes, that kind of stuff. If that interests you, I can share that with you.
So do you guys work on, or any of the people that you partner with work on enrolling teachers at all in any of this process? Or is it really just kids and parents?
No, we spent $3.5 million in the Pittsburgh Public Schools over the last 5 years. We brought training from the West Coast to the teachers. We offered training to the teachers and work with the teachers. Yes?
Just a comment, there's a fellow named Everhard Breckman who's written a wonderful series of books on working with complex systems. And much of what you talked about here reminds me of one of his heuristics, which is the leverage is at the interfaces.
It's definitely about complex systems. We try to simplify them as much as possible, but they're complex systems, and we don't run away from it. I actually like it. I mean, I like trying to figure that stuff out. I'm excited about it. I get excited about work every day. I mean, it's not fun all the time, but I just think that sometimes in the nonprofit world, we try to dummy down stuff that's complex instead of make it understandable for people and tell them it's complex. Like, you can't fix a community with a 1-year grant that's been disinvested in for 40 years. Like, but we sell that to people every day, like, write this grant and we're going to put lightning in a bottle. Well, that's not realistic, right? That community went down over 40 years. 1-year program is not going to, resurrect it. Like, you can get leverage points, you can create catalytic movement, but this notion that you're going to fix these problems in 1-year cycles is just not realistic. And we're pushing back on foundations to say, most foundations fund you 1 year at a time. And I'm like, you should be doing 3 to 5 year funding. Like, it's like a business proposition. It takes 3 years to get it before you actually start getting traction. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, you were talking about the separation between the groups that always want to come in and help, and then the communities that, especially the ones that are vulnerable, that you want to help. have you seen your programs affect how integrated the community is, or have you seen movement on some of the metrics that I think might change how it goes forward, how its ability to help itself in the future, or just any of those kinds of things? The reason I ask, like, so we talked about this movement as being fair, you know, it's almost exclusively Caucasian, or there's a lot, you know, it's very dominated that way, especially in Minnesota. And I get the sense that one of the reasons of that is because our personal lives are quite segregated. That's my sense of it. And I'm wondering, is that the case where you're working, and are your projects changing any of that?
I think certainly yes. For example, Skunkworks, which will be launched, it started, we do our soft launch, we did it last Friday, and 300 people came through. It was the most eclectic group of people I've ever had in space. The team of people I'm bringing on board to help us with their known entities and then their unknown entities. And they're coming to do their work in a very vulnerable community. It's changed the way they saw assets, and it's changing the way the community sees partnerships. I think what I would say the biggest shift for us is showing people how their past practices were transactional, and getting the people on both sides to say, there's some things that are just transactional. I'll give you an example. My wife and I were living in two different parts of the country before she moved back to Pittsburgh. I must have looked at like 100 houses, right? And this was two and a half years ago. And every time I would call her and send her pictures, by that afternoon, somebody had put a bid on the house. That's how hot the market was. And it was driving me crazy. Just literally crazy, like, what, you know, what is going on? How did you like turn this corner? But that whole time I'm working with this person, the real estate person, who I befriended, right? As soon as we sold that house, the relationship was over. Now we went around all the city, looking at the houses, calling each other, meeting with the wife. But as soon as I bought the house and he made that transaction, that left a bad taste in my mouth. And I know the guy, we still friends, but we're friends because of work relationships too. Like had he just been a real estate person, I would not have seen this guy again. And I bought and made one of the biggest investments in my life in a transactional way with somebody who I trusted, right? Think about that. How many people do that every day and they make this decision to put hundreds of thousands of dollars on a house, and this person has gotten you through the process, and as soon as it's done, they're gone, right? So I think what I try to do now is I try to offer up, I know that some of the things you do are transactional, but for it to work for me, I need more transformational activity. And what we've done is we've embedded that psyche in everybody we work with. For example, Google, when we first showed them everything, I stopped the meeting halfway in the meeting and I said, I really don't want any money from you. I want to establish a long-term partnership with you. If that's something you're not interested in, let's stop the meeting because we're wasting each other's time. And my team was like, they're getting ready to sit down. I was like, no, right? I would rather be in a long-term relationship with Google than get a check. I think a check's important, and if they value anything that they're doing with us, they're going to find the resources to make it happen. That's what I believe. But having a relationship with them where I could call them and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, what are you thinking? How can this work differently? I think that's far more beneficial long-term than just getting a check. And I think we have to quit functioning like it's all about a check. And part of that's us. If you function like you just need a check, and let me be clear, I do need a check. But I'd rather have a relationship with a check than just a check. And if I had to pick between the two, I would rather have a relationship, because I believe that there's in-kind learnings that I could get from a corporation that outweigh the check. If I can adopt them and bring them into my nonprofit thinking, the benefits, it's exponential. And that's how I think. I don't know if that's going to work out. But I'll just say this. I've doubled our budget and staff in 24 months. I've changed the culture in 24 months. That is not because I was acting transactional. I can assure you that. Right.
Yeah, so it seems like in a lot of your work, you've brought folks from outside of the community to engage with the community. And I guess I'm wondering, because I've seen that go well and I've seen that backfire a lot with people who maybe have a lot of technical proficiency but don't have the cultural skills or other skill sets, right, to interact with the community. So I'm wondering if you do like a kind of vetting around that, or you do some kind of cultural competency training, or there's steps that you take in terms of bringing people from outside to interact with vulnerable people.
Well, there's a series of, people always ask me why I'm at meetings all the time. Like, you just meet all the time. And you're right. I cannot just cold call a person, bring them into this environment. They have to be sensitized to what they're walking in, because everybody's in shock, in a sense, right? People come and they go, wow, I didn't expect that. And other people go, wow, I didn't expect that. So we try to like get people to understand what they can expect on both sides. The other thing we try to do is get people to really honor, if you just want an event, like people call me literally every day and want to do something with us. And I send it to somebody else, like that's an event, that we don't do events. So my team knows if somebody wants to do an event with us, we don't do events. So that's the first way you vet that. Like there's people who just want to get into your stream of your contacts, right? People who want more than an event, we sit down and talk about. So literally, I spend per organization you saw up there, there's 150 active partners we have right now. I literally spend no less than 12 hours with each of them before we enter into anything significant. The other thing we do with our core partners, we do a predictive index on them. You guys know what that is? Mm-hmm. It's like a Myers-Briggs, right? But we do a PI on our core partners to see, like, I like you, Kathy. I really do. But that doesn't mean we should be partners. So we do a PI on all of our core partners to see whether or not they would fit. And then what we do is, whenever I pay for training, we invite our core partners, senior staff, in to be part of the training. So they're getting brought up to the speed to have these other conversations, not just me. And then what we do on the other side is, I bring in those teams of people and I have them do site visits that usually last between 1 to 3 days with us before we make any decisions. And once they do the site visit, I usually, bring in our core partners. They talk to them what they do. We take them to their actual physical buildings. They go and see the stuff, touch it, feel it. Then we go and take them somewhere else, and then we debrief with them. And then we say, hey, here's what we're inviting you into. Is this something that you still have an appetite for? Because once you say yes, it's a roller coaster ride. It's, this ain't an Uber ride. You're not getting to your stop and getting out. This is more of a roller coaster, right? So we explain that to them, and then they either make the decision to step up or not. And that's fine for us. Like some people have decided, like, this ain't for me, and that's fine. And we don't dismiss them. We just put them at the outer ring of our network, right? Because they're still valuable. Just as a core partner, they might not be a good fit.